Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we continue to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sending salutations to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, inshallah, we're going to continue where we stopped a few days ago on how to channel the fear of Allah to the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the verse that we mentioned the other day, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyamu kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. O you who believe, we prescribe the fasting just like the way we prescribe upon the people who came before you. Perhaps you may fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The psychology behind fasting is self-discipline and self-awareness. Each and every one of us here fasting during the day, we try as possible to stay away from haram. That is self-awareness. When we find ourselves in a secluded area, we can eat, we can drink water, we can do whatever we want to do. However, we abstain from that. That is self-discipline. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, when we do all these things, we are channeling to one thing, that is the taqwa. The conscious of Allah, being aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I said the other day, let's look at it practical. The relationship between us and our wives. When there's a good relationship between a husband and a wife, when the love is intense, both parties would love to please one another. Both parties would not want to, on purpose, hurt the feeling of one another. This is the way we have to look at it, the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, channeling it to the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this comes with a lot of good things. When there's a good relationship between a husband and a wife, and the husband goes out and he sees something, he buys and brings it to his wife, or the wife goes out and she sees something, she purchases it and brings it to the husband because of the good relationship. When we fear Allah, or when we love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it comes with good things. Our Imam just read, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. When we fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we are conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ, Allah will teach you that which you do not know. Allah will give you ilham, He will give you basira, that which someone who does not have the love, the connection, or the fear or the consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah would not give him. But you that you fear Allah, Allah is going to give it to you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, channeling the fear of Allah as the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu in tattaqullaha yaj'al lakum furqanan wa yukaffir 'ankum sayyi'atikum wa yaghfir lakum dhunubakum wallahu ghafurur rahim. When you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yaj'al lakum furqana, Allah would give you the basira to be able to differentiate between falsehood and lies. Truthful and falsehood. When Allah loves you, He gives you hidayah. That is the love. So when we love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's just as though we fear Allah, we are conscious of Allah. So my point here is, parents, let's inculcate the love of Allah in our hearts and channel that love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the heart of our kids. Rather than teaching them the fear of Allah and showing them or giving them the psychology of understanding the torment and the torture of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes when you fear something, you do things just because you do not want to face punishment. But when you love something, things that you want to do, you do it willingly, you do it with so heartedly. So when we fear something, we are forced to do things even though we don't want to do it. Even though we don't want to do it, we are forced to do it. But when we love something, we do it willingly. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put His love in our hearts. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put the love of Him in our hearts and our kids' heart. أقول ما تسمعون وأستغفر الله العظيم ولكم والسلام